I think the arguments that Christians have offered in favor of God, based on the existence of morality, have been misunderstood, principally by atheists, but also by some Christians, okay?
Okay, but it is possible to understand an argument and still not find it compelling. Let's see which it is. Welcome to Paulogia, where a former Christian takes a look at the claims of Christians. If you're new to the channel, please take a second to tap on the subscribe button so that you'll be notified when new science, theology, and news videos come out. And we've recently launched an audio-only edition that you can find wherever the finest podcasts are gathered. Today, we're returning to Christian apologist Greg Koukl and his video, Where Do Moral Laws Come From?
Here's the way the argument goes. If there is no God, there is no objective morality, but there is objective morality.
Well, we're off to a bad start, because I'm entirely unconvinced that there's objective morality.
That would be evidenced by the problem of evil.
The problem of evil is an argument that some non-believers, though typically not me, make against the existence of an all-loving God. I don't know how this argument could be evidence for objective morality, but let's hear Greg describe it from his own video on the problem of evil.
And it appears that there's a conflict between God's goodness and God's power. If he was good, he'd want to get rid of all evil in the world, and if he is powerful, he'd be able to, but evil exists, and therefore he's either not good or he's not powerful.
Okay, so evil exists is an asserted premise in the problem of evil. Based on context, Greg must be equating evil exists with evil is an objective thing. But that's not evidence. That's just assertion. Greg relies on people's intuition and the sloppiness of the English language to gloss over this. Sure, in day-to-day conversation, people use good and evil as if they're nouns, as if they're actual things. Star Wars is sometimes described as the battle of good versus evil, for example. But upon examination, this is really just a shorthand to describe categories of things that a person considers to be harmful versus helpful, beneficial versus detrimental. These are ultimately adjectives acting as a placeholder for the nouns that they represent.
Therefore, there must be a God.
That doesn't actually follow, but since I reject the initial premise, I won't agree that the argument is sound. So there's probably no need to waste further time on whether the formulation is valid.
Now, there's a lot I could say about this, but let me address myself specifically to the confusion, because atheists are quick to object that you're saying I can't be moral if I don't believe in God. And that is not our point.
Was this the point of confusion that your intro alluded to? I've never been under the impression that this was the argument. Nor have I heard other atheists make this faulty assumption. But Christians sure like to bring this up, so maybe it's happening and I'm just not seeing it. In any case, I agree that such a view would be a misunderstanding.
Our point is, if there is no God, morality has no meaning. And the quickest way I can get to that point is to offer a challenge offered by the late Christopher Hitchens, one of the new atheists. And he said, tell me one good thing that you can do as a theist that I can't do as an atheist. That's a fair charge.
It is a fair charge. But it's only half the charge, Greg. You're the author of an entire book called Never Read a Bible Verse. That sole premise is to admonish people against using a sentence or paragraph of the Bible in isolation of its greater context. And yet, that's exactly what you're doing. Quote mining.
Name me a moral action committed by a believer, or a moral statement or ethical statement uttered by one, that could not be made or uttered by a non-believer. I've asked this in a number of venues and forums now. I'm going to keep on asking it. I've not yet had an answer. If I was to ask anyone in this room, however, could they name a wicked action performed or a vile statement made by someone attributable only to their religious faith, there isn't a single person here who would have to hesitate for a second.
Christopher Hitchens' point here wasn't to demonstrate the possibility of morality in an atheist. Some meek plea to convince the world that non-religious people can indeed be moral too despite their reputation. Now, he skims right over responses to this near-rhetorical first question, because he considered the answers trivial and self-evident. Hitchens' far sharper point was to demonstrate that there are instances where religious conviction can cause people to override their own personal instinctive morality and do harm that they would otherwise not do because of that religious adherence. Agree or disagree, that's a very different charge than what Greg put forth.
But notice how it focuses on behavior. Can he do the same behaviors that we do? The answer is yes, he can. That's not the issue. The issue is whether the behaviors are good or not without God.
That depends entirely on your definition of good. If your definition of good is something like within the will of God, then of course you've defined yourself into a circular argument.
So let me offer another illustration. I'll use Christopher Hitchens. What if Christopher Hitchens said, I don't believe in writers? And I said, well, if you don't believe in writers, then how can you read? And he says, I can read anything just as good as you can read, maybe even better. Well, you see, the point isn't who can do the behavior more effectively. The point would be whether there's anything to read without writers. Now, this is called the grounding problem. What makes morality possible? What does it sit on, so to speak? Reading depends on writing. Writing depends on writers. That's the grounding problem with reading.
Oh, Greg, that's simply not analogous at all. There could be a room full of writers creating lovely sonnets, spinning thrilling adventures, and espousing profound wisdom, all in Sumerian cuneiform. And I will be able to read none of it. You see, it's not the existence of a reader and writer alone that makes written communication possible. Rather, it's an agreement between the parties to interpret arbitrary symbols in a specific way. For example, English readers agree that this symbol is to be interpreted as the sound. Russian readers agree to interpret this symbol as the zhe sound, or something close to that. I'm sorry. Chinese readers agree to interpret this symbol as monkey. Note that none of these arrangements of lines have any kind of absolute or universal meaning. The arrangement and assignment to sounds or words are arbitrary. This arrangement of lines could just as easily have been assigned to the f sound as the k sound, but the extent to which people are willing to agree to these subjectively developed standards is the extent to which a writer and a reader are able to share ideas. A message in cuneiform cannot be read at all in English. However, English and Spanish share a more similar alphabet, so there will be more areas of potential understanding. And so it is with morality. To the extent to which people agree upon common goals, they will find agreement on the best and most ethical ways to achieve those goals. But these goals are not prescribed. Different people may differ in goals. They are necessarily subjective. In Greg's analogy, it is the submission to a common alphabet and vocabulary that allows reading, not writers. If the writer had to play any role in this particular morality picture, it would perhaps be as the existence of other moral agents or sentient beings. For a single being entirely alone in the universe would theoretically have no moral obligations of any kind. It's only when other beings exist that it's possible to evaluate how behavior affects others.
Morality, being good, depends on there being morals, moral laws, and moral laws require a moral law maker.
You'd have to define moral law here. Legal laws, of course, require a governing body and a writer because they are created by humans to attempt to restrict human behavior within a society. Scientific laws, on the other hand, are merely observations for which no exceptions have yet been found. And so the word law can be used in a variety of different ways. Which are we talking about here? Greg does not make it clear what a moral law even means. I'm unconvinced that such a thing exists. Greg and other Christians have sometimes described these as moral intuitions, but obviously everyone is going to have somewhat different intuitions. So far, Greg is merely asserting moral laws, counting on your intuition, without actually demonstrating them.
If there is a moral lawmaker, then there are moral laws.
Moral laws require a moral lawmaker, and a moral lawmaker proves moral laws. That's circular.
And both the Christian and the atheist can do good things regardless of their beliefs, because there are good things to do.
Good is merely the label that we put on the range of potential actions that are most likely to result in the outcomes that we prefer. If we agree on preferred outcomes, we might agree to what is good. But where we don't agree to preferred outcomes, we don't. Insisting that your preferences align with the preferences of some authority figure does nothing to bridge any gaps between differing preferred outcomes. Greg wants his proposed God to have tie-breaking authority in morality disputes, but it doesn't work that way. If you want to convince someone of a moral position, you need to first find the common goals and persuade. Because I said so doesn't work. Nor does because my God says so. That's really all this objective morality shell game is.
But if there is no God, then there are no morals, then there are no good things.
Again, good is merely the range of things that lead to the results we prefer. We don't need a God for that, only results we prefer. The only thing a God can add to the process is to act as an authority to override disputes that can't be settled with rational discussion. Or, as Christopher Hitchens observed, motivation for people to act against their own moral intuitions and best interests.
You can still do the same behaviors, but they're not good for the theist or the atheist. That's the point.
At least one of us has missed the point, Craig. Which of us was it? For more of my commentary and observations on the wisdom of Greg Koukl, tap on the thumbnail, and I'll see you there. Later.